And, before we started voting on the movies and I watched all the Spark shorts, I was like, oh, please, I do not want to speak on Burrow. And of course, I get chosen to speak on Burrow. Burrow is about a young rabbit who's excited to be on her own and build her first home, and she's got her light and her shovel and her tape measure and her plans, and she's just eager to start. And when all of a sudden a bodybuilding mole enters her space, introduces himself, excited to meet her, and she's a little bit taken aback. And then he shows her fancy blueprints, and she's like, ah. And then a mouse comes into the space and shows her his fancy 7-room plans and his red pen ready to mark it up and like, let's help you, we're here to help you. And she's like, no, thank you. And she's digging, trying to get away from them, digging, and she falls into the home of a hedgehog family, frogs who like to read, inappropriate lizards, the party ants, and a very private and scary badger. And she just wants to get as far away from everybody as possible. And so she frantically digs all the way down. And then she stops because she's exhausted, but she feels like, okay, this is safe. And then she gets her broken shovel. She's been digging so hard, her shovel breaks, and she hits the side of the wall, and the earth shakes and it cracks open and water starts to come out. Just a little bit of water, and then more water comes, and she doesn't know what to do, and so she tries to block the water with her arms and her body, but it just won't stop. So she climbs all the way back up, and she knocks on the badger's door, and just is so embarrassed and so ashamed, and just wants to cover and hide her face and doesn't know what to do. And so the badger, he calls for the community in a very scary way, where I would think he's yelling at me. But everybody, all the animals come, and they're like, she explains what happened, and then they go and they go with her. They divert the water so that the water comes up to the ground and into the pond. The problem is solved. The water's diverted. Everyone's happy and celebrating. And aren't we all like this young rabbit? Like, most of us have this I would rather do it myself attitude. We are self-sufficient and we are independent, which is a good thing. But we have responsibilities that are more than we can handle sometimes. And we need to balance independence with dependence. We need both. We need both independence and dependence. Back in the old days when we met at Richland, we used to carry heavy things out of the storage bin to the front, and a lot of times I would carry a 6-foot table or a 4-foot table or a TV, and Mike Arlen would always ask, Lori, do you need some help? And I'd be like, no, I can do it. And then Paul Hirose would say, yeah, let her do it by herself, it's good for her. But it was so hard. But at that time I was learning that doing everything myself was my old pattern. But I don't have to live like that. That's what I learned as a child. But there's a new pattern. I don't have to do it by myself. I can receive help, and that was going to be my new pattern. And so I asked Mike, okay, next time from now on, anytime you ask me, can I help you? Keep me accountable, but I'm going to say yes, thank you. And then we can carry whatever it is together. Let me tell you, it was so much more fun to work together with Mike than to say, no, I can do it myself. Okay, so maybe we're self-sufficient because of our genetics, or maybe we learned to be that way somewhere along the way. We learned that it's better to do it ourselves. If we want it done right, it's better to do it ourselves. Or maybe we learned that there aren't people around that we can depend on, and so we did do it ourselves. But here's the problem: taking on too much over and over again and trying to handle the problem on our own, it causes stress and we become overwhelmed. And because we're self-sufficient and independent, we expect ourselves to be able to handle everything. And our expectations, they may be unrealistic. And we've learned in the past year and a half that there are life's circumstances that we experience that are going to be more than we can handle on our own. And when we live out of balance of our independence and dependence, it really hurts us. It harms us emotionally and physically and mentally and even spiritually. That stress and feeling overwhelmed, it really impacts us. When we try to do jobs or do life in a way that we weren't meant to, that is going to be overwhelming to us, that is more than we can handle. And that stress that we experience, it has to come out at some point. It comes out in a way that harms us and harms the people around us. We're not loving to the people around us. We're not loving to ourselves. And so here's God's solution. When we're faced with circumstances and responsibilities that are above our capabilities, we need to remember that God is with us and that He wants to help us. He's not judging or criticizing us or saying, you know what, you really should be able to do this on your own. No. We were never meant to do life alone. In God's creation story, there is one human who has this huge responsibility of taking care of the garden. And it's way too much for one person to handle. In Genesis 2:18, God said, it's not good that man should be alone. And I will make a helper as his partner. And so the man, he needed help. And until he gets that help, until he gets the help that he needs, creation will not be good. So even the creation story is about humanity helping one another, needing the help of one another, our need for relationship and connection with God and with one another. King Solomon, who's known to have incredible wisdom that was given to him by God. He writes in Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, 2 are better than one, because a good return comes when 2 work together. And if one of them falls, the other can help him up. But who will help the pitiful person who falls down alone? You see, Solomon's not talking about marriage, even though we use that text a lot in marriages, because we're like, what can we do? How can we encourage people? Well, you know how we were all meant to live together? We were all meant to be in relationship with one another, to help one another. And that he's talking about the good that happens when we connect and work together. Even Jesus in Matthew 26, verse 38, he says, my soul is overwhelmed with grief to the point of death. So stay here and keep watch with me. So even Jesus, he asked Peter and James and John to be with him in his moment where he feels overwhelmed by the job, the task, the responsibility that was before him. You see, we need both independence and dependence. So getting back to Burrow, right? Everybody, the water's diverted, everybody's celebrating, they're jumping up and down and they're excited and they're getting ready to go back home. And I love how the rabbit, she kind of clears her throat very shyly. It's very hard. And she asks for help. She shows them the plan and she asks for help. And everybody helps. And her new home is really close to her neighbors. She doesn't feel like she has to go far away. And her one room plan that was on like a legal pad, it turns into the 3-bedroom home with everybody's help and everybody working together. And it turns out better than if she could have done it herself. And honestly, I don't know if she could have done it herself, because poor thing was having trouble getting her mailbox to even stand. So the next time you're faced with circumstances or responsibilities and you're feeling like the rabbit, you're feeling stressed and you're overwhelmed and you feel like I got to do this myself, try to pause and think about, what are you feeling? You know, it's so interesting talking to people about this movie and just asking, what do you think the bunny felt? What do you think the bunny felt? And everybody was so sure about what the bunny was feeling. And yet everybody had a different answer. And I think it has to do with the bunny in the story mirroring the feelings that we have inside of us. And so many of us, we don't like to ask for help. And it's for a variety of different reasons. We don't want to burden others. We don't want to appear needy. We don't want to share our ideas with other people, or we feel like our plans aren't good enough. That was me, right? The plans, mine is just on a yellow legal pad piece of notebook paper, and you got this fancy blueprint. Or maybe we feel like we should be able to do this by ourselves. We have these unrealistic expectations. And so when you feel overwhelmed or stressed, and maybe thinking, oh, I can't ask for help, because be reminded that God loves you and He is for you, and you are not alone, and you are not meant to do this alone. That you can ask for help, and you can trust people to say, no, I can't do it. And if they say no, then ask someone else, and then ask someone else until your needs are met. So for me, it would be like, instead of waiting for Mike to ask if he can help me, I can be like, hey Mike, I'm gonna go get the table, can you give me a hand? We can do it together. We were created to do it together. Asking for help is not easy, and it takes courage and humility and vulnerability and learning a new pattern of doing things. A new way of taking out, forgetting our old pattern, not doing that, but creating a new pattern. But when we balance both independence and dependence, I believe we will feel accepted and loved, and this sense of connection and belonging. And the results of us working together is going to be way better than if we would have been able to, if we would have done it ourselves. The results will be good. And we can tackle whatever is before us together. And I think that is what we call experiencing heaven together.